Hello. I hope you have a great convention so far. Unfortunately, I can't participate in person due to the war, but I'm here sending you this short introduction for the Jewish foundations of conservatism. And I hope you'll see it as an opportunity to explore the Mosaic origins of conservatism. So when we think about conservatism, there are basically two pillars, the form and the content, which Oakeshott understood quite well. Form is how to be a gentleman, and the content obviously is the political philosophy that is rooted in the tradition itself. So when we think about the form, there is a relationship between liberty and virtue. And this is the kind of understanding that Burke wrote a lot about, that liberty without virtue is folly and vice. And we can see this understanding deeply rooted in the Mosaic tradition, and in a very, very famous text that was written for about 400 years and was published in the 2nd century after Christ, called Pirkei Avot, which, if I have to translate something, would be like what the Father taught us. So we can see it actually start from Moses, that got the Torah at Sinai, and he gave it to the next generation, until it got to the Great Assembly. And there are very interesting concepts which are written there, which all basically showing the relationship between liberty and virtue. One of them, if we can think about, if we would like to look at who is might. So what is it? Which kind of person should be a might person? He who controls his passion. And you can see that the kind of society that we need to build, that we are called to build, is based on people who have might, which means that it's a society of people that can control their passions. Another interesting concept that was developed is the relationship between virtue and ethic. We can find in Adam Smith's book, Theory of Moral Sentiment, that was published in 1759. This book is very, very similar to a book that was published 19 years before that by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the Ramchal, called Mesilat Yesharim, Path of the Just, which, if you read those two books, it's unbelievably similar, and you might think that maybe Adam Smith knew somehow this book. But again, it's showing that the kind of, what I'm trying to show, that the kind of in order to build a conservative society, there is a big emphasis on virtue and ethics. So the conservative paradox, is, I see it, is if many people address Burke as the first conservative, so what did he actually conserve? Obviously, you can't be the first conservative because you have to conserve something. And Burke wrote a lot about some people that gave him his inspiration for his theory, which were Koch, Blackstone, and Selden. All of them refer deeply to the Jewish tradition and to the Old Testament. And I think it's not surprising that they were thinking and taking their inspiration from the Old Testament, because the Old Testament is the book that is full with politics. So if you want to build a society, you have to go back to the sources of the society and the tradition that comes from the Old Testament. John Selden was very famous because he wrote few books, very interesting books. He knew very well Maimonides, he knew very well Gemara, Talmud, Mishnah. He knew very well the Mosaic tradition when he developed his great work. So we can see some way that they are very similar, the law of the Bible and the common law. And I think the most interesting thing is the casuistic law. Both of them are casuistic law and not abstract law. And we know that Burke is really, really critics on abstract law, because he sees these kinds of law which will create a cannibal society. So there are a huge parallel between the two. But more than that, I'm not surprised that British doesn't have any kind of separation between church and state, because again, this is a concept that comes from the Bible itself. Also, we can't see this kind of separation in the Bible itself. And it was really interesting to see the coronation of King Charles III. And when I was looking at the coronation, I was like, I know it. And then I knew where I know it from. It's actually, the ceremony is stage by stage, is written in the Bible. So if you really want to understand all the small symbolic things that happen in the coronation, just open the Bible and you will see all of them. So if we would like to go deeper into the ideas, and there are many, many conservative ideas that are coming directly from the Bible. Let's start from the most basic thing, that you have a private property. You can find it in the Ten Commandments, where you shall not steal. So I just want to give a couple of examples how conservative principles are embedded in the Mosaic tradition. So first of all, think about that the law should be defined in one territory and not apply to all territory in the same way. The concept of self-government, that only legitimate rule arises from the people itself. Moral integrity, which means that if the kingdom is corrupt, the kingdom will fall. That the concept that you have to have a limited government. The king cannot take all the gold from the citizens. You have some limitation on the government itself. The concept of rule of law. Okay, the king has to copy the law. He is not the origin of the law. The king is a subject to the law. And again, you have the concept of separation of powers, because the king has to write the law, which is not the source of the law, in front of the priests. And obviously, at the end, we have the concept of public servant, which means that the king has to serve the people and not vice versa. So we can actually see some very interesting conservative values, which are basically written in the Bible itself. Another important aspect of this tradition is that conservative does not oppose change. We can actually think about the word conservatives itself. It's con and serve. Con in Latin means to add something, and serve is obviously to serve. So conserve, to add something and to serve something. So it's inside the word itself. But we can see also, Burke wrote it quite well, a state without a means of some change is without the mean of its conservation. And this is the kind of concept which we can find in the Mosaic tradition itself. The law in the Torah, the oral law in the Torah, called halacha. Halacha in Hebrew means to walk, which means the law itself has to adapt and to change during time. Okay, it has to be related with tradition, but it's not frozen. It has the ability to adapt. Another important aspect is the relationship between liberty and law. We know that for Burke, there is a really big importance that liberty should be limited, because otherwise we can get an anarchy. And this is exactly what we can see in the way that the story of the Bible is built. We have Passover with the celebration of freedom, but right after it we have Shavuot, which is law, meaning without law you won't have a real freedom. They are connected, and they are connected in the Bible itself by Omer, which is the connection. You have to count 49 days between Passover to Shavuot to show that they are both connected to each other. So freedoms demand law in order to fulfill itself. So in this short introduction, I just wanted to mention that the conservative movement origins are coming from the Mosaic tradition. And when the American founders spoke about city upon a hill, they didn't think about Athens or Rome. They thought about Jerusalem. And this is an invitation for all of us who love conservatism also not to neglect its Mosaic origins. Thank you so much.